The fully fledged Civil War lasted for more than 12 years and included the deliberate terrorizing and targeting of civilians by U.S.-trained government death squads.
Let me tell you guys that I am so excited. I am so
play the stereotype much.
Whenever I'm like feeling down about my stupid dog, I just play this clip. This guy
so happy. I am really so thrilled to be right now sharing this amazing, glorious, super and exciting moment of my life with all of you guys. And let me tell you that we are really changing the world as we know it. The world is not anymore the way it used to be. No, no, no. Be connected.
Wow. Playing up those racial stereotypes.
Be connected.
Well, he can't. I mean, he's Hispanic.
I guess he's allowed to. Okay.
Yeah, he's not. He just is what he is, dude.
Yeah, I'm sure he acts like that in normal life too. It's very cheerful.
Are you a Bitcoin guy? You strike me as a Bitcoin guy.
I am. I don't really like to think about it much. I bought into Bitcoin after the crash, because it went up to $400 a Bitcoin, and it was never going to get that high again. So I just bought into it at 2. I was like, maybe it'll go up to 300. And I was wrong. And then it went up to like 1,000, and I was like, oh man, well, I'm just going to buy it at $700 a Bitcoin, and we'll never see 1,000 again. And I ended up selling out again, and of course I was wrong. And then it goes up to, and it's like, I think this has happened like 3 or 4 times.
It's been at 50,000 for a while.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know, it's been several years ago. I bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. I was like, I'm going to hang on to this. And I think it was like $300 or $400 a Bitcoin at the time. I spent $1,000, bought it.
The experts, online, they're predicting $1 million of Bitcoin. Now's the time to buy it. Get in.
Yeah.
Get in and hold. That's what they say. Just hold. Hold and hold.
Hodl, not hold. Hodl.
Oh, I don't know the lingo.
Yeah, you got to hodl. Hodl those.
That's not what we're really here to talk about, though.
So we're toughening up at the border. We'll be, I think, in great shape over the next 12 months. We'll have a lot of things happening. But we cannot let people enter our country. We have no idea who they are, what they do, where they came from. We have no idea what their records are. We don't know if they're murderers, if they're killers, if they're MS-13. We're throwing them out by the hundreds.
The immigrant crisis at our southern border.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tends to come around every election cycle, doesn't it? All of a sudden there's a crisis when the election...
It must be effective. Who are all these people who just hate immigrants? I haven't met that many people who hate immigrants, have I? Maybe I have, and I just don't know that part of them.
I don't think it's so much hatred, but it is fear. It's fear of the unknown. It's fear of the outsider. It's fear of the roving barbarian hordes coming over our border.
Are you sure it just isn't manufactured like they need an enemy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course it is.
Like the Jews were in
and that's what they're tapping into. They're just that. I think it's kind of something as old as time. You fear the tribe over the hill.
Oh, the innate sort of genetic fear.
Yes,
what they're tapping.
It is. I mean, that's why it's so effective. It's that ingrained
the amygdala,
tribalistic. Yes, deep down in your brain stem. It's that just tribalism. It's in its purest form, literally tribalism. You want your tribe to be cool, and you're scared of the other tribe coming in and messing up your tribe stuff, taking some of your stuff.
I wanted to talk a little bit about immigration and sort of debunk some of this crap. It is Hispanic Heritage Month, and I wanted to make sure that we cover the topic. And, this is as good a time as any. So let's get into a little bit of facts. I know that they're not popular these days, but where do immigrants come from? The United States has more immigrants than any other country in the world. Today, more than 40 million people living in the U.S. were born in another country, accounting for about 1/5 of the world's immigrants. The population of immigrants is also very diverse, with just about every country in the world represented among U.S. immigrants. More than 1 million immigrants arrive in the U.S. each year. In 2018, the top country of origin for new immigrants coming into the U.S. was China, with 149,000 people, followed by India, with 129,000, Mexico 120,000, and the Philippines 46,000. By race and ethnicity, more Asian immigrants than Hispanic immigrants have arrived in the U.S. in most years since 2009. Immigration from Latin America slowed following the Great Recession, particularly from Mexico, which has seen both decreasing flows into the U.S. and large flows back to Mexico in recent years.
I did not know that.
How do immigrants compare with the U.S. population in overall education? So if we look at the chart here, we can tell where our immigrants are educated. So U.S. born, 8% have less than a high school degree, 33% have a bachelor's or more, and foreign born is at 27% less than a high school degree, and 32% bachelor's or more. So they have about the same, foreign born has about the same rate of college graduates as U.S. born. Mm-hmm. Although they make up, they have about a 4 times more uneducated population percentage-wise. And we can look at the statistics from each individual country here in this chart as well. We see Central America and Mexico making up a large chunk of the immigrants that are high school education or below, whereas South Asia, of course, tops the college-educated immigrants percentage-wise. A vast majority, 71% in fact, of immigrants coming from South Asia have at least a bachelor's when they get here. This sort of explains the whole the model minority thing, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it tells a tale of Latin American immigration to the country. And the one of the reasons that immigration helps us, especially, American workers, is they take up the unskilled labor positions, a lot of them. The Mexican and Central American immigrants make up about half of them are uneducated or below a high school degree.
And of all the different immigrants that come to this country, Mexican and Central American are disproportionately undereducated compared to, certainly the other immigrants coming in and U.S.-born citizens.
Right, exactly. Well, a lot of them come to work the fields and whatnot. They take a lot of these unskilled positions that Americans don't really want, frankly.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
According to Pew's most recent data, 77% of immigrants are here legally. The U.S. unauthorized immigrant population rose rapidly from 1990 to 2007 before declining sharply for 2 years, and stabilizing at 10.5 million in 2017. Pew Research Center's most recent estimate is well below a peak of 12.2 million in 2007, but has roughly tripled the estimated 3.5 million in 1990. The estimate includes 1.5 million or more people who have temporary permission to stay in the U.S. through programs such as DACA or TPS, Temporary Protected Status, as well as awaiting decisions on their asylum applications. Most could be subject to deportation if government policy changed. 1.5 million who could be deported at any minute based on the whims of the government, essentially.
Yeah.
The decline in the arrival of new unauthorized immigrants in recent years has resulted in a population that is increasingly settled into the U.S. About 2/3 of unauthorized immigrants, 66%, had lived in the U.S. for more than 10 years as of 2017, up from 41% 10 years earlier. Conversely, new arrived unauthorized immigrants, those in the U.S. 5 years or less, accounted for 20% of the unauthorized immigrant population in 2017, the year when we had the most data. For Mexicans, the pattern is even more pronounced. The vast majority, 83% of unauthorized immigrants from Mexico, have been in the country for more than 10 years, while only 8% have lived in the U.S. for 5 years or less. So it's not like these guys just arrived here. The vast majority of Mexican illegals that are in this country have lived here for more than a decade.
Yeah. It's just numbers like this stand in such stark contrast to the idea that's being sold on Fox News about, we were talking about earlier, these roving hordes of uneducated
rapists
and MS-13, and they're sending us their murderers and their rapists that are coming here so they can get our sweet, sweet food stamps.
White girls. Oh, the
white girls and food stamps.
Which one are we scared of worse?
I'm not sure. Both, all everything that applies.
I can't do it. I can't do Trump.
All of the above. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, I don't.
Who are
so
these
crazy.
anti-immigrant people? I feel like I haven't met a lot of these people.
They're created. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
I think there is a very understandable human aversion to people coming here without our consent and possibly taking part in our welfare state such as it exists, or getting the benefits of living in this country without paying back into it to some degree.
Well, they pay taxes, but they don't get any benefits. The ones who are here illegally, the vast majority of which have been here for a decade or more.
It's just like there are certain groups that have taken this kind of meme that exists in all of our brains, and they just ran with it. And it really doesn't have much to do with the reality of the situation of what's going on. Occasionally there'll be, I don't know if you remember the immigrant caravan from a few years back.
Yeah, I do. It was covered on Democracy Now! Quite a bit.
And it gets played up as if like that's what's going on. That's what's happening nonstop, and that's where. And then they'll flash the numbers. Well, how many, illegal immigrants are living in the country? In the country currently. Put that number up, and of course they don't have the breakdown of how they entered or what nationality they are. Then they'll show the photos of these unwashed hordes coming over the hill, and they let you believe that that's what's going on. It's simply not.
In fact, the overstayed visas are talked about a lot. New data. Canada now tops the list for overstayed visas, not Mexico. From the DHS report that just came out.
Shout out to Jen. I shouldn't have said her name.
I can edit that out. I don't know who that is. But...
Shout out to the chick that I dated from Canada who overstayed her visa and had to leave the country because of it.
The category with the highest overstay rate is student and exchange visitors. Was she an exchange student?
She was.
Let's talk about criminality, because this is one that's bandied about, how these criminals, MS-13, like you said, the Texas Department of Public Safety. This is data from 2012 to 2018. This is arrest data. We find that undocumented immigrants have substantially lower crime rates than native-born citizens and legal immigrants across a range of felony offenses. Relative to undocumented immigrants, U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. In addition, the proportion of arrests involving undocumented immigrants in Texas was relatively stable or decreasing over this period. The differences between U.S.-born citizens and undocumented immigrants are robust to using alternate estimates of the broader undocumented population. Yada, yada. Just pretty clear numbers here. And it makes sense. I don't think people would come here illegally and then start committing crimes. They'll just get deported. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Just on the face of it, does it?
No, of course not. If you are, if you're here because you want to be here, and you're just a normal working person, so you're going to keep your head down because there's people just looking to get you deported for any reason. Why would you?
All the illegal Mexicans I knew, well, they weren't illegal. They were, they would come in and work the fields. What are they? Green card? They were all super nice, man. Some of their kids were assholes. The kids that were born here were assholes, but.
I mean, I've known some. They're all certainly nice people, hard workers. The ones that I knew were definitely involved in illegal stuff. Nothing harmful, but probably less blatant about it than their American counterparts like myself that were with my privilege
certainly,
and everything else. I just didn't give a shit. Whatever, catch me.
Well, the numbers bear that out. Non-immigrants are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes in Texas over that period, 2012 to 2018.
Yeah.
And this is pretty standard numbers across the board. There's a few studies, but I think this is the most recent one.
It makes perfect sense. I don't know why that would even be a contentious, why anyone would think otherwise about those people. I mean, if it weren't for the fact that
it's just the fact that brown people equals crime, isn't it? Isn't it just the same sort of just innate racist tendency?
Yeah, I think so. In this instance, yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you and say that it's just
well, this is not an episode of Is It Racist, but if it were.
Yeah.
It is illegal under international law to turn away asylum seekers. That's what when it comes to illegals, that's what's going on now. These refugees from these Latin countries, they come here to seek asylum, and under Trump, they were getting turned away, and Biden is doing the same sort of thing. They're turning away the asylum seekers under COVID reasons.
Yeah.
Citing health and safety reasons why they can't take all these asylum claims. We're literally breaking international law by turning them away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what their processing would be like. I mean, that seems like it would be a legitimate concern at least, or a legitimate reason to not have to deal with large groups of people because there is an international pandemic going on. I mean,
CPB's unlawful turnback tactics include an extensive array of inaccurate information and abusive treatment that asylum seekers have faced at the hands of U.S. border officials, including assertions that the U.S. is no longer providing asylum, or that people from specific countries are not eligible, yelling at, harassing, and assaulting asylum seekers and their children, threatening to take away children from their parents, and setting up pre-checkpoints that prevent asylum seekers from reaching the U.S. border. This is a lawsuit from the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, against, I guess, the government, against U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They're suing them for violating the asylum laws.
Isn't this kind of how it is everywhere, really? I mean, it's just through time, this has always been the issue. I mean, you see this happening in Australia right now. You see it happening all over Europe. And you see this happening in the Asian countries. I recently listened to a podcast with Yeonmi Park. She's a North Korean defector. And she would talk about South Korea and some other country around there. There's just this huge bias from the real poor places to the places with the real repressive regimes. There's just this bias amongst the other countries, the wealthier, more affluent countries, against people coming from that area. And it's just interesting.
I've got mine, and you can't have yours. It's
this interesting kind of deep-seated psychological thing with humans, where you want to welcome in the people that you feel like are going to bring wealth, and you want to just keep out the people that you feel are going to take the wealth. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of U.S. intervention in Latin America. This is the reason why we are flooded with asylum seekers from Central and South America. The Monroe Doctrine. We learned about this a little bit in school. This is the idea that the U.S. and the U.S. alone should be able to colonize Latin America, reinterpreted in modern times after independence from Spain and Portugal to mean colonize in the neoliberal sense of the term, open up the markets for U.S. investment. In other words, the natural resources and labor force should be under the sole purview of the United States. This was the reinterpreted Monroe Doctrine. And originally, it was the idea that the U.S. should have military hegemony in the Western Hemisphere broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in nootropics, check out my website. Our line of cutting-edge products is available at our lowest prices in the industry, now with free shipping through the fall.
Shire Hemp Farms, your number one source for Delta 8, CBD, and smoke Municipal CBD Products currently running a sale on the 1 mil Delta 8 carts, and I have seen a significant increase in sales since we started this, so do not miss out. This will not last forever. And for you listeners out there, ES Pod will get you an additional 20% off. Oh my God, that's insane. Check us out, ShireHempFarms.com today.
Thank you to everyone who is listening to the show and watching the show. Please subscribe to us on our YouTube channels, follow us on Reddit, subscribe to us on Rumble. Leave your comments in the description, and we will answer them as soon as we possibly can. Head over to homepage. The link will be in the description. You can follow my Twitter account, follow Tony's Facebook page. You can follow us everywhere: Stitcher, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. Thank you guys very much, and we'll get right back to it here. And this was codified, sort of, under Ronald Reagan. It was called the Reagan Doctrine. Mm-hmm. This is exactly what he set out to do, and he had a long litany of interventions in Central and South America to achieve those goals, to prevent nationalizing of industries so the U.S. could keep their assets there. We're going to go through a few of these. There's over 20. We're just going to touch on a few, because some of these could take up their whole episode by themselves.
Central America is a region of great importance to the United States, and it is so close. San Salvador is closer to Houston, Texas, than Houston is to Washington, D.C. Central America is America. It's at our doorstep, and it's become the stage for a bold attempt by the Soviet Union, Cuba, and Nicaragua to install communism by force throughout the hemisphere.
So we must install American-style capitalism by force.
The Salvadoran Civil War was a civil war in El Salvador, unsurprisingly.
What?
Which was fought between the military-led junta government of El Salvador and the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, FMLN, a coalition of umbrella organizations of left-wing groups, from October 1979 to January of 1992. A coup on October 1979 was followed by killings of anti-coup protesters by the government and of anti-disorder protesters by the guerrillas, and is widely seen as the start of the Civil War. The fully fledged Civil War lasted for more than 12 years and included the deliberate terrorizing and targeting of civilians by U.S.-trained government death squads, including prominent clergy from the Catholic Church, the recruitment of child soldiers, and other human rights violations, mostly by the military. An unknown number of people disappeared, while the UN reports that the war killed more than 75,000 people between 79 and 92. The war ended with the Tultepec Peace Accords, but in 2016, the El Salvador Supreme Court ruled that the 93 amnesty law was unconstitutional and that the El Salvador government could prosecute war criminals. During the Carter and Reagan administrations, the U.S. provided $1 to $2 million per day in economic aid to the Salvadoran government, and by 1984, $1 billion had been given. The U.S. also provided significant training and equipment to the military. The Salvadoran government was considered friendly and an ally by the U.S. in the context of the Cold War. In May 1983, it was reported that the U.S. military officers were working with the Salvadoran High Command and making important decisions. There was nothing sort of secretive about this whatsoever, really. It just wasn't reported widely in the U.S., unsurprisingly.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things just kind of continue over time. So, brought up the Monroe Doctrine. That's James Monroe. There's this idea kind of at in the dying days of European colonialism that, well, this is our area of the globe, and we're going to kind of take care of all these lesser savage countries near us. And like the idea of colonialism kind of outlived the colonial states to a certain degree. Like it died out, all the colonial states died out, but just this idea that we have to keep intervening. The idea policy, that we're going to keep going in there and doing these things, and we're going to keep them in check, whether it's obviously by different means than it was happening, under the French, Italian, British.
Well, it was a way to funnel taxpayer dollars in the form of military aid and intelligence money into operations that would benefit capitalist corporations in America. is exactly what it was. I'm sure you've heard of Nicaragua, what happened there. The El Salvador one is not as well known. It's mostly known for the ties to the Catholic Church, and that was sort of the beginning of the left-wing Catholic Church movement down there. But Nicaragua was a little more known, I think. Maybe just among us, but I don't know.
Of setbacks and failed negotiations, the Sandinistas were able to seize control of Managua in July 1979. It was now, with the Sandinistas in power and Ortega as de facto head of the country, that the Nicaraguan revolution entered its second stage. Supported by the USSR, the FSLN implemented massive economic and agrarian reform, confiscating large amounts of land from Somoza's supporters and redistributing it among the peasantry. During 1980 and 1981, armed militia groups started to spring up in rural areas and near the border to Honduras, opposing the FSLN. They quickly became known as the Contras. Mostly formed in exile in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and the United States, they included ex-members of the National Guard. Some were right-wing anti-communists, while others had originally supported the revolution but became disillusioned with the Sandinistas' policies. A coalition of native tribes who had had their land confiscated and their people forcibly removed by the FSLN government also lent support to the Contras. In January 1981, Ronald Reagan became America's president. Reagan's foreign policy, the Reagan Doctrine, emphasized rolling back global communism by supporting rebel groups fighting communist governments, both openly and covertly. How friendly these groups happened to be towards democracy and human rights tended to be a secondary concern. In Nicaragua, many Contra militias had been accused of human rights abuses, including kidnapping, torture, rape, killing of civilians, and targeting health workers. However, the Reagan administration saw the Sandinistas as a threat to its interests and supported the Contras. In 1982, without informing Congress, Reagan gave the CIA permission to aid the Contras with a $19 million budget. Congress blocked any further aid to the Contras in 1984, so Reagan's hands were tied. That November, the FSLN won a general election that international monitors described as free and fair, but the Reagan administration described it as a Soviet-style sham. Unable to use American funds directly to support the Contras, a plan was hatched to do it indirectly. For months, the U.S. had been surreptitiously selling weapons to Iran, which was at war with Iraq at the time, using Israeli and Iranian arms dealers as intermediaries. In exchange, Iran would help free American hostages in Lebanon. In December 1985, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a military aide to the National Security Council, proposed a modification, whereby the arms would be sold directly to Iran and some proceeds diverted to the Contras. Arms shipments to Iran proceeded during the early months of 1986, and over $3.5 million was given to the Contras. A subcommittee headed by John Kerry would later allege that North and the CIA had also helped build up a cocaine trafficking network to provide additional funding to the Contras.
It's hard to understand how people could read this history or listen to this history and not see us as the bad guy in all this. I mean, come on.
I feel like people.
That's my understanding that Oliver North was prosecuted, but I don't know how much time he got. But he was the fall guy for all this.
So Oliver North, he was I think he was pardoned later, but he was sentenced to a really serious prison term of 3 years probation.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
He did have, I just want to be clear, he did have to do 1,200 hours of community service at a public housing project in Southeast Washington. So
the Contras were various U.S.-backed and funded right-wing rebel groups that were active from 79 to the 90s in opposition to the Sandinistas. During their war against the Nicaraguan government, the Contras committed numerous human rights violations and used terrorist tactics. These actions were frequently carried out systematically as a part of the strategy of the Contras. Supporters of the Contras tried to downplay these violations, particularly the Reagan administration in the U.S., which engaged in a campaign of white propaganda to alter public opinion in favor of the Contras, while covertly encouraging the Contras to attack civilian targets. From an early stage, the rebels received financial and military support from the U.S. government, and their military significance decisively depended on it. After U.S. support was banned by Congress, the Reagan administration covertly continued it. These illegal activities culminated in the Iran-Contra affair, which is what we were just discussing.
Yeah, this is famously what Ronald Reagan forgot, that he gave this order when he was asked about it on a congressional hearing. He just forgot.
Oopsie.
Oopsie.
Got a lot going on when you're president.
I sold some arms to some terrorists. I mean, who doesn't? But I did.
The United States began to support Contra activities against the Sandinistas on December 81 with the CIA at the forefront of its operations. The CIA supplied the funds and the equipment, coordinated training, and provided intelligence and target lists. While the Contras had little military success, they did prove adept at carrying out CIA guerrilla warfare tactics. The CIA advised them to incite mob violence, neutralize civilian leaders and government officials, and attack soft targets, quote-unquote, including schools, healthcare clinics, and cooperatives. The agency added to the Contra sabotage efforts by blowing up refineries and pipelines and mining ports. Finally, according to former Contra leader Edgar Chamorro, CIA trainers also gave Contra soldiers large knives. A commando knife was given, and our people, everybody, wanted to have a knife like that, to kill people, to cut their throats. The victim dug his own grave, scooping the dirt out with his hands. He crossed himself. Then a Contra executioner knelt and rammed a K-bar knife into his throat. A second enforcer stabbed at his jugular, then his abdomen. When the corpse was finally still, the Contras threw dirt over the shallow grave and walked away. Pretty horrific stuff. And this is repeated all throughout Central and South America. And the ramifications obviously are playing out today. This was going on all up through the 90s.
Yeah. It's also important to note many of the people that were involved in this from the U.S. side are still big names in politics to this day.
For sure.
Oliver North just had a show on Fox News I don't think it's still on there, but 3 or 4 years ago had a show on Fox News. I mean, Donald Rumsfeld, he was a big part of this. This is these people
all the same
broke international laws. Supported these military juntas that were just horrific human rights violators, and there was no accountability. And not only was there's no legal accountability that they had to face, where they were brought up on war crimes trials or had to deal with things in the U.S. But there's no. The biggest problem for me is there was no social accountability. We still listen to them. They still go on, and we want to hear what they have to say.
Like there was no mainstream press coverage. The Fringe, reported on this stuff, but
yeah, we know about it now, and yeah,
we knew about the Iran-Contra scandal, but it's like you're right. There was no accountability at the top whatsoever. You're absolutely right. How are people not held to account for this shit? And we're not done. And you're speaking in past tense, but it's still going on, and we'll get to that. Let's talk about Chile a little bit here. Chile.
In
the original 9/11.
The Chilean people democratically elected their country's first socialist president, Salvador Allende. However, it said that the then U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, wasn't keen on potentially another communist country alongside Cuba developing within the Americas.
Not too keen on
American
you all doing what you want to do.
It's not my thing. Chilean economy.
Personally.
$10 million were made available to destabilize Chile and depose Allende. On Tuesday, September the 11th, 1973, the presidential palace was attacked and Allende killed. His place was taken by American-backed dictator General Augusto Pinochet. So began a dark era in the history of Chile. Soon after the coup, around 11,000 people were arrested and taken to the National Stadium, which had been converted into a prison and torture center. Politicians, journalists, factory workers, trade unionists, anyone who posed a threat to the military regime. It's also thought dozens of executions were carried out in the stadium by Pinochet's men.
Those dangerous trade unionists and workers.
Yeah. Publicly execute them. That's the only way we deal with them.
So that was Chile, just an introduction there. There's a lot more to the story, but the main point hit. The Democratic elected president was overthrown with a U.S.-backed military coup. This is a pretty common scenario.
And we put a monster in his place. A monster,
a murderous tyrant. Yep.
A murderous tyrant that terrorized the country for decades. And the country's still dealing with the after effects of
all this shit is a large part of the reason why there is such a large left movement in Central and South America. It's just the blowback to the colonialism. Panama. In 1903, the U.S. aided the secession of Panama from the Republic of Colombia. The secession was engineered by a Panamanian faction, backed by the Panama Canal Company, a French-U.S. corporation, whose aim was the construction of a waterway across the Isthmus of Panama, thus connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In 1903, the U.S. signed the Hay-Haran Treaty with Colombia, granting the United States use of the Isthmus of Panama in exchange for financial compensation amidst the Thousand Days War. Increasing tensions between Manuel Noriega's dictatorship and the U.S. government also led to the United States invasion of Panama, which ended in Noriega's overthrowing. I remember sort of the fallout of this when I was a kid, the Panama thing, and it didn't seem right even back then. It's like, well, we were friends with Noriega, but we invaded? What? I guess he wasn't doing what we wanted. Kind of like Hussein, right?
Something like it, yeah. Yeah, I do. I remember seeing his face, on the nightly news. That's as a kid. So Panama is kind of it's an interesting one. Is there any argument for, let's say, if a place like that, it's vital to international commerce because of the canal. You have some sort of kind of wacky guy ends up taking power that could potentially put a damper on the international community's use of the canal. Yeah, well, Noriega.
Noriega was our guy. We put Noriega in there.
Yeah. Yeah, we put him in, then he started acting goofy.
Right, he acted up.
So we had
to
go.
Dealing drugs and whatnot, too, and we knew about it, and we were fine with it. But then, I don't remember what he did. Maybe I can look it up real quick. But Noriega was a murderous tyrant who supported the United States in the Americas, including providing support for the Contras. He angered the U.S. when he began providing assistance to Cuban intelligence and broke the U.S. trade embargo with Cuba. There was something he did to piss us off.
He got a little bit extra wild, I believe. Let's see.
What do they call it? What do the kids call it? He was getting extra?
He's getting extra. I've heard that, yes. Okay, yeah, so he was indicted in the U.S. on racketeering, drug smuggling, and money laundering. So he was just getting a little extra, wilding out and having a good old time, and we had to bring him back down to earth a little bit. It's crazy. We could just go into a country and arrest the leader of the country and bring him back here and put him in our jail.
What are you arresting me for? Drug dealing. But you knew about the drug dealing. You helped me do it. It doesn't matter.
I'm just reminded of the that Star Wars meme where he looks at him and says, "Wait a second, this whole operation was your idea."
All right, let's move into Bolivia. 1971 coup. The U.S. government supported the 71 coup, led by General Hugo Banzer, that toppled President Juan Jose Torres of Bolivia. Torres had displeased Washington by convening an Asamblea de Pueblo, Assembly of the People, in which representatives of specific proletarian sectors of society were represented: miners, unionized teachers, students, and peasants. And more generally, by leading the country in what was perceived as a left-wing direction. Banzer hatched a bloody military uprising starting on August 18, 1971 that succeeded in taking the reins of power by August 22, 1971. After Banzer took power, the U.S. provided extensive military and other aid to the Banzer dictatorship. Torres, who had fled Bolivia, was kidnapped and assassinated in 1976 as part of Operation Condor, the U.S. supported campaign of political repression and state terrorism by South American right-wing dictators. This was the 71 coup. I haven't read too much about this one specifically.
There's a lot going on during that time period. And, it seems like it's kind of like this wave of left-wing revolutionary.
Well, this was 71, so this was the tail end of the
from like like 1960 to like mid 1970s. It just kind of wave just moved across Central and South America.
All right, in 2019, this is why Bolivia is the most recent one, I believe. 2019, the most popular president in the history of Bolivia, Evo Morales, was denied his fourth term as president due to quote-unquote irregularities cited by the OAS. The military and police of Bolivia compelled Morales to resign, and he was given asylum in Mexico. In the protests to these actions, police repression on protesters was severe. This was 2 years ago. The Sencada and Sacaba massacres were the killings of 19 anti-government supporters of Evo Morales by Bolivian security forces during the protests after the ascendancy of Jeanine Áñez. Áñez went on to grant immunity to all police involved in the killings and injuries caused during the repression. And she was massively criticized after this granting of immunity. She actually had to withdraw the order of amnesty and step down to be replaced by MAS representative, and that's Evo Morales' Workers' Party.
See, Morales, he was also he was an indigenous person, right?
The majority of people in Bolivia are indigenous.
Yeah, and he was like the first indigenous. Is it all South America? Person elected to the high office? I believe so. Shout out Evo Morales. Love chewing those coca leaves. We talk about it all the time. So he loved them.
Huh. I haven't heard too much of his stuff or read.
Yeah,
but
I've watched a couple interviews with him. He'd have like some, U.S. European journalist or whatever, and he'd be sitting there and, oh, you want some coca leaves? And he had this big, like a Kentucky hillbilly, just a big wad of coca leaves in his jaw, just going to town.
I imagine chewing the raw leaves is probably pretty similar to like tobacco or something, I imagine.
I think so,
strength,
yeah. It's not like cocaine, but, probably has really mild effects. But
in 2021, Áñez was arrested and charged with criminal offenses related to the Sencada and Sacaba massacres, two massacres that took place during the first days of her presidency, a move which several international organizations labeled political persecution. So I doubt this is going to stand, but there was some blowback to what she did in Bolivia. Things are starting to change slowly, man. It's a slow process and grinding, but shit is finally starting to change a little bit, I hope. But, you always wonder what the blowback to that is going to be.
I wonder to what extent we still do operations in South America.
I think the only place that happens to the extent that it used to is Colombia. That's our main base of operations in South America. That's sort of a military outpost of the United States.
So I know that I occasionally, in my YouTube travels, when I'm on autoplay, and I occasionally listen to Jocko Willink, and so it puts me on to other different.
Why?
He's got some interesting interviews, really. I mean,
sure.
And so I occasionally get put on these other playlists where I'll hear about these different operators, Navy SEAL operators, and they don't say much about it, but they just kind of casually mentioned, before Afghanistan, I was in Nicaragua for 2 years, or, before I went to Iraq, I was in, Bolivia for whatever. Hang on.
Oh, all those U.S. operations we have in Bolivia.
What were you doing in Bolivia? Hang on, I want to hear more about the Bolivia part.
Right.
You're talking about Iraq. I get what's going on there.
Defending the interests of U.S. corporations, the same thing they've been doing for decades.
And it's happened multiple times, so much that when I hear one of these special ops guys talking about it, I'm waiting for him to mention the South American, Central American country, and then just mention the name, and then not actually say anything about what they were doing there.
The OAS allegations were indeed the main political foundation of the coup, and they continued for months. In Bolivia, the electoral authorities, this is talking about what we were just talking about, U.S. involvement here. What was the U.S. involvement in this 2019 coup in Bolivia, coup attempt? The electoral authorities report a preliminary vote count, which is unofficial and does not determine the result, while the votes are being counted. When 84% of the votes were counted in this preliminary tally, Morales had 45.7% of the vote and was leading the second-place candidate by 7.9 percentage points. The reporting in this unofficial, non-binding tally was then interrupted for 23 hours, and when it picked up again, Morales' lead had increased to 10.2 points. By the end of the official count, it was 10.5. According to Bolivia's election rules, a candidate with more than 40% of the vote and at least a 10-point lead wins in the first round without a runoff. The opposition claimed that there was fraud and took to the streets. The OAS Electoral Observation Mission issued a press statement the day after the election expressing, quote-unquote, deep concern and surprise at the drastic and hard-to-explain change in the trend of the preliminary results after the closing of the polls, but provided no evidence to support the allegations because there wasn't any. This is from an opinion piece in The Guardian. This has been established repeatedly by a slew of expert statistical studies, but the truth was quite plain and easy to see from the data available.
Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard that? Election fraud. Where's your evidence? We don't have any, but we know it happened. Okay, cool.
The only thing I wanted to say about Cuba was this: the recent quote unquote protest in Cuba. You remember that? That was largely organized by the CIA. There is some whistleblowers who leaked some photographs and stuff of basically social media campaigns is what they were doing. They were retweeting all these social media posts, trying to show support for the anti-Cuban government protesters, which, if you read any of the reports from people on the ground, it's vastly different from what the U.S. media was reporting. And in fact, the U.S. media has had to retract some of their stories because they were using fraudulent photographs. They had taken photographs from the Cuban Day celebration and were claiming that that was the anti-government rally. It was pretty ballsy. But there's people who have broken down all these tweets and retweets, and they all say exactly the same thing, and they're all from these Twitter accounts linked to, they're all Langley Twitter accounts.
I don't see a connection.
You guys could at least use a VPN to try it.
Yeah. NordVPN, man. I've got it. It's $11 a month.
Langley,
not that much. Yeah, and it seems like, I don't know. There's just nobody in the U.S. I don't think most people pay any attention to what goes on in South America, Central America. So,
right.
Yeah, I feel like you can just
because of the media, or is that because they're brown, or just?
I think people just don't care. People
don't care about any other country besides the United States, in my opinion. There's never nobody cares about anything else going on in the world.
I think people were really interested in Brexit. Well, I think there's so much noise there's so much that goes on in Central and South America. There's a perception, and I mean, I kind of feel this way too. When something happens, you think, oh yeah, well, stuff's always happening down there. You know, that's just how it's always been. I mean, since I was a kid.
Talk about hand waving. That's like,
yeah. And I think that the people in power that want to do these operations, they understand that that's a sentiment amongst most people here in the U.S. So you can kind of just get by with doing that. And special ops operators can casually mention that they spent a couple years doing operations in wherever, Chile, and no one bats an eye about it. Think, yeah, of course they were down there. There's stuff that goes on down there, and we got to be there to.
Well, that's on purpose. There's no big exposés in our mainstream media because the mainstream media protects the corporate interests too, because they all have the same interests. They all have the same goal, and that's making money. The best way to do that is using taxpayer dollars. Why would they use their own money to make money?
Yeah, that's true.
So I mentioned this last week, and I'm not sure if you caught this, but this was a U.S. Officer complaining about the military.
Good evening. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller, United States Marine Corps. I'm the current battalion commander for Advanced Infantry Training Battalion. I've been in the Marine Infantry for 17 years. Started my tour with Victor 1-8. It's the current unit that's doing perimeter security, dealing with the mess that's going on there. You can see open source reporting that there was an explosion and some people were killed. I know through my inside channels that one of those people that were killed was someone that I have a personal relationship with. Won't go into more details because the families are still being notified. Not making this video because it's potentially an emotional time. Making it because I have a growing discontent and contempt for my perceived ineptitude at the foreign policy level, and I want to specifically ask some questions to some of my senior leaders. And I'll say, as a person that's not at 20 years, I feel like I have a lot to lose. If you play chess, you can only see 2 to 3 moves out because there's too many variables. I thought through if I post this video.
Okay, you kind of get the gist of it. Basically, he's complaining about his upper management decision-making, in particular, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, of course. He went on a social media campaign. He went on a bunch of talk shows complaining about the government, complaining about the civilian leadership in the military, basically, which is the portion of the military which is responsible to the people democratically.
Yeah. I have heard that sentiment echoed to a disconcerting degree amongst people that I know. That, well, you know, if they just let the military do what the military needs to do, and you didn't have a bunch of, you know, pansy, blah, 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 civilians wanting to step in and say you can't do this, you can't do that, but you have to do it this way, you know. Wow, what a Pandora's box you're wanting to open up. You know, this always goes well when you have a military that's not subject to civilian leadership.
Obviously, they don't know that they're fascists, but they really are, because that is not how society works, man. When the military
at
is
all
outside of the framework of the government, then you have a problem.
That is a big problem. Historically,
Yes.
it always, I know our military is different, and they're, you know, paragons of virtue, but
They have really nice guns.
they got really nice guns. Yeah, it's, this stuff comes down to this, there's a real fetishization of the military. And I guess it's in all countries. It's certainly in this country a lot too. And that could lead to bad places. If people start really listening to people like that and wanting to reduce civilian controls.
People saying stuff like,
ooh, that's a
the
dark
majority
road to
doesn't know
walk
what
down.
they're doing. You know, democracy's not really working that good right now.
Not really working good.
People are stupid. They need someone to step in and take the reins.
People, the workers don't know how to do anything. They need a boss over top of them.
Hey, now you're talking my language, buddy.
Well, that's what I was saying. What was it, like a week ago?
All right. Well, this did happen before, of course. We all know this story. Smedley Butler.
I appeared before
Love
the
that name.
Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions.
So Smedley Butler. This was an attempted coup against the U.S. government during FDR's presidency. Thankfully, it fell apart. It wasn't too well planned. It definitely could happen again, you know.
Yeah, there's no reason it couldn't happen again. You know, it's a scary sentiment that seems to be becoming more and more pervasive. And yeah, I imagine if you went around and you asked the people there at the January 6th, the original January 6th, you know, should we get out? Should we release the military from civilian oversight and let them do what they want? You would get a very high degree of.
If you had one of these fucking generals, like Michael Flynn or one of these Trump guys, say, all true patriots, join me. The government is going the wrong direction. We need to take power. Dude, there would be throngs of people falling in line behind him, goose-stepping, dude, in 2 seconds.
Yeah, of course there was.
And these fucking conservatives cry like babies every time you call them fascists. And then, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
they are, dude. They fucking are. But they want to stop any talk of that because it's true.
Yeah, there's certainly those people that exist out there. I mean, I would hope that there would be some kind of men of conviction in those higher positions of power in the military that would take their oath to the Constitution more seriously than their perceived political grievances or their oath they take to the commander in chief. But I'm thinking about this. There was a story that had just come out recently about a general. This was after January 6th. This was a general that basically had conversations with other world leaders and with leaders of Congress.
Yeah,
that
you're
said
talking
like,
about,
hey, we're not going to, if Trump tries to do something, we're not letting him do it. You know, if he tries to launch a nuke or if he tries to do this or that, and basically they had to kind of go AWOL or go, it would be AWOL, but
Mark Milley.
They were going to.
He's the head of the Joint Chiefs.
Milley, yes, Milley.
He's the quote unquote woke general.
Yeah, okay. Obviously.
Thank God he exists, dude. he's the guy
woke.
you're talking about, right? But he's not.
That's it.
He's not a progressive whatsoever. I should say.
Well, I know. No, sure.
Sounds
he's
like
not
he has some
progressive.
principles.
That's all I asked for. You
Right.
can be a conservative. You can have differing ideologies, but I do want you to have principles. That way, we can at least talk in good faith.
The moment that the military stops responding to the government is the end of the democracy. 13,000 Haitians migrate to Texas.
More than 13,000 mostly Haitian migrants have crossed the Rio Grande into Texas and are now living under this bridge. Would you look at this? Conditions, they tell us, are squalid, with only a few toilets and little access to food or clean drinking water. NBC News has learned the Biden administration is planning to ramp up deportation flights back to Haiti over the next.
This was a couple days ago. The last I heard, Biden had started doing that under this, the health Department of Health or whatever.
Yeah.
Or that he's allowed to deny these asylum seekers the right to seek asylum, which is guaranteed under international and U.S. law. So Biden is basically succumbing to the right-wing propaganda about the immigrant crisis, I guess. He doesn't want this used against him politically, I assume, is why he's doing it. There's videos of police fucking with these guys all over the internet, too.
Of course. I could only imagine the assholes that live in that area coming down there and just shouting all sorts of obscenities. And
did you see that there was one guy with horses and...
Oh, yeah. I guarantee they've got, like, Minutemen operations set up where they're riding back and forth. We're going to make sure they don't sneak in and, rape our women.
I want to read a quote from People's History here. Talking about Haiti. Because these are Haitian immigrants. They suffered 2 earthquakes. They suffered a frickin' tropical storm. 2 U.S. coups. And then the president gets assassinated by U.S.-trained military people from Colombia. This is when Columbus arrived in Hispaniola, which is Haiti. This is from A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. But too many of the slaves died in captivity, and so Columbus, desperate to pay back dividends to those who had invested, had to make good his promise to fill the ships with gold. In the province of Sicao on Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. Indians found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. The Indians had been given an impossible task. The only gold around was bits of dust garnered from the streams. So they fled and were hunted down with dogs and were killed. Trying to put together the army of resistance, the Arawaks faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, and horses. When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicides began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. When it became clear that there was no gold left, the Indians were taken as slave labor on huge estates known later as encomiendas. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. By the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left. By 1550, there were 500. A report of the year 1650 shows none of the original Arawaks or their descendants left on the island. That was the introduction of Haiti to the West.
And what an introduction it was.
I appreciate you doing the bonus show with me this week, Tony. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Happy
always
Hispanic,
happy to do it.
Hispanic Heritage Month to you, buddy.
I will, what was it that Donald Trump said? He's going to eat a taco bowl because he loves Hispanic so much. In honor of National Hispanic, right. I will eat a taco bowl.
That sounds about
He did. He did. It was like a taco bowl. He's like, I love Hispanics. Okay. Anyways.
The great.
The great. I live, yeah. All right. Anyways, MetaMaxPerformance.com, ShowerHempFarms.com. Check us out. James, peace.
See you guys later, man.